So, but what I wanted to underline is that doesn't work. And
Yes.
you hear well?
Yeah.
Also indeed. So, what I wanted to underline is that the real difference between Foucault and Hadot is not only in this displacement we saw of the subjectivity, of the location of subjectivity from fundamental position in theory of knowledge to in ethics, not only in this, but rather in the very conception of the subject itself. The great difference is in the conception of the subject itself, and not of its location in aesthetics, ethics, ontology, etc. As we read attentively Hadot criticism, we see that Hadot is unable to abandon the conception of a subjectivity as something transcended with respect to life or praxis. Therefore, he understands Foucault's paradigm of the life as a work of art as if Foucault was saying that there is something as an author, a man, a subject, which will create and form his life as a work of art. So he is unable to abandon the current representation of an author which creates and forms a work. That's the normal way to understand a creation is there is a subject who is the author and he will create a work. So if the object is the life, there will be a subject, an author, which will create the life as a work of art. But this is not at all Foucault's position, because already in an essay written in 1969, a very famous essay, Who is an Author? Very famous essay by Foucault. Foucault calls precisely in question, referring to writing, work of art, not at all to ethics, the idea that the subject is something external or superior or transcendent with respect to the work. This, I don't know if you are familiar with this essay, it's a very beautiful essay. He reduced the author to what it is, that is to say, to a juridical and social fiction. So he analyzed the notion of an author, and he shows how this notion was formed, and it was formed as a juridical and social fiction. You probably know that's very easy. He reconstructs how the notion of authors goes with the modern notion of copyright, the right of an author. As you know, this is a modern notion, which, as Foucault shows, does not come at all, was not produced at all in order to protect the interests of the author. Forget the idea of that the copyright is meant to protect the right of the author. The copyright is meant to protect eventually the right of the publisher, eventually. But it's not this is the point. Foucault shows the origin, how the notion of an author who is responsible, who has the right, the copyright for his work, starts, and it is not at all to protect the author, but to be able to ascribe to him the responsibility of a work, and then the possibility of judging and condemning. So when we see that the notion of copyright appears for the first time in the 18th century, toward the end of the 18th century, it is in order to make possible to eventually condemn the author or make a process to the author who wrote a subversive or a pornographic or whatever. So the origin of the notion of copyright is juridical, not at all to protect the author, but eventually to jail him. Put him in jail. etc., etc. But so I will not. It's very. You can read the essay below. But the Foucault idea is so. The author is a juridical and social fiction. There are many societies, also in the past, who had a great literature without the notion of an author. For instance, the idea of the anonymity, which defines a lot of cultures. No? Also medieval, Western literature and philosophy is often anonymous. Anyway, what Foucault's thesis is that the work of art, I quote, is the opening of a space in which the subject ne cesse de disparaître, does not cease to disappear. So he sees the work of art as a space in which the author has to disappear. And he will also state that the indifference with respect to the author is one of the fundamental ethical principles of contemporary writing. So he shows how in contemporary writing the author is not at all in the position of a transcendent principle in respect to the author, etc., etc. Anyway, the important thing that Foucault's idea is that an author almost does not exist, or he has to disappear in the work. So when he says that we have to shape, to create our life as a work of art, it could not mean that we are in the position of an author who has to create the work of art, because for him the author does not exist, cannot exist in this sense. So the Hadot idea is it's a complete misunderstanding. When one can speak in Foucault perspective of a work of art without implying the necessity of an external subject who is the author of this.